We are witnessing new policies, new attitudes in France. Emmanuel Macron did not get elected just by chance. You know, he is also the result of frustrations and failed policies of the past years in France. So he was elected by the French people, and his deputies were elected by the French people, which means that there was a demand for new policies, not only in France, domestic affairs, but I think also in European affairs and foreign policy. So it's always difficult to know, you know, which is most important. Probably domestic affairs prevail over questions like Ukraine and EU integration, relations with Russia, business with the Russian oligarchs. So it's difficult to know. But what I see is that the Macron attitude is widely shared in France, of course, with the exception of the far left and parts of the conservative right, and certainly the far right with the National Front. They have all campaigned against the EU, against NATO, and some of them have campaigned for closer relations with Russia. But the majority now of the political class that's in power, in parliament and government, are pro-European. I would say pro-NATO as well. Hence, will favor the EU policies towards Ukraine, NATO policies toward Ukraine. And because nothing is changing in Moscow, that Putin's attitudes are only getting worse. If you include the meddling in the French electoral campaign, the French do not see any reason that they should trust Putin more today than yesterday. So I think for Emmanuel Macron, it will be relatively easy to continue and reinforce the cooperation with the German government, the Minsk process, Normandy format, and with the EU and NATO on defending European security. Because, you know, the bottom line is that Russian interference in Ukraine, military interference, has jeopardized European security at large. I mean, the whole of Europe feels less secure when you have regions of the continent that are occupied by foreign troops or, you know, foreign mercenaries.
Do you think that it is possible in the nearest future that Russian support will be overseen in French parties which will fight for next elections, let's say, or any like this, let's say, anti-European agenda will be forced further?
I think it's a very good question. I think the Russian authorities went too far in using subversion in the US, in France, also in Germany, in other countries. There has been, I mean, there is constant meddling with smear campaigns, with trolls, with, you know, they just went too far. So now Russia has become toxic. And I think even for the National Front, the relationship that Marine Le Pen exhibited, she didn't have to, but she thought it was a good thing to exhibit the fact that she went to Russia, that Putin, you know, welcomed her in the Kremlin as if she were a potential head of state. That, you know, wasn't good for her in the end. So I mean, if Macron does a good job, things get better in France, things get better in Europe. I don't see how those extreme parties, how they could use the Kremlin support for their own benefit. I don't see that. It just now your question also about business.
As well.
I think in France we see the same kind of trend as we've been witnessing in Germany. That a few years ago, German businessmen and French businessmen were very keen on contacts with Russian industry for a very obvious reason, energy, and a little more than energy, but mainly energy industries, and a lot of good deals were made. And so those business communities had problems adjusting to the new confrontational climate with Moscow. But, you know, in Germany and in France, they had to understand that this was going to last. It was not just a 6-month thing with sanctions. It's already more than 3 years that we have sanctions and confrontation. That's going to last, and that they have to adjust. Hence, you know, business is looking elsewhere, and it's more difficult to maintain business ties with Russian industries and basically the Russian state behind it. It's more difficult today than it was before the annexation of Crimea. So, you know, I think just the Kremlin is losing.
In the very end, I'll ask the last question after the conference that we both participated at. Things that you've heard, do you see that how to address that in a very proper and diplomatic and delicate way? So, okay, what we've heard of it here today at the conference, does it give you more idea and trust that, okay, things are going to be fine here in this country because people are working towards European integration? They know that their path is very hard, but they're eager to go through it. There's a lot of work and to implement actual stuff that we just got, the visa-free thing and agreement and everything, but then we need the new flagship, as it was mentioned by your colleague, and then there's a lot of work. So my question is, do you trust to what you've heard?
Yes, I do. I do trust what was said by the representative of the Ukrainian government and certainly the deputy from the Rada. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be sincere. And I thought they managed to be pretty honest about what needs to be done, that a lot needs to be done. They didn't restrain, I think, from criticism of what wasn't yet done. The very good news for me, compared to a year ago, is that Donbass was discussed.
Yeah,
a year ago, it was just almost impossible for me to discuss Donbass. Only NGOs involved in Donbass or with displaced people from Donbass would agree to discuss it with me. So I think that now that we Europeans can convince our Ukrainian colleagues and friends and politicians that Donbass is a major issue and that it needs to be discussed rather than put it aside with I think the wrong assessment that was being made in Kiev, that it was better not to mention a conflictual situation that might limit or slow the cooperation with Europe and NATO. I think, in fact, it's the opposite. Is the more the Ukrainians will continue to discuss Donbass, but openly, with giving the information and trying to build a policy toward the Donbass people, and mention Russia and give their analysis to us of what they think the Russian authorities are doing and what the Russian forces are doing. I think this, for us, is a sign of maturity, that big problems can be discussed because we are not formal allies of Ukraine, but we are very close partners now.